You really need to make sure you're double checking your house at night. This story comes from a woman named Shannon who lived in Seattle. Shannon lived alone, but for months she was complaining about weird noises coming from inside her house at night. And sometimes she would wake up with bruises on her arms that had no explanation. Shannon would also come home from work to find things in her home were not the same as she left them. Like this one time she came home and saw sawdust all over her living room floor. So that's when she set up a camera and caught this image in her kitchen one night at midnight. Shannon was obviously terrified, so she called the police, who came to her house and tore up everything looking for clues as to who the intruder was. And that's when they found this hole behind her couch. And inside this hole was rope, tape, a lock of Shannon's hair, and a vial of her blood. Police said that it looked like someone had been living in this hole for months. Whoever this was never found, and Shannon has since moved homes, but every now and then she complains of a weird scratching noise at night. Have you ever wondered how accurate progression photos are? Progression photos are what detectives use on people that went missing years and years ago to kind of guess what they would look like today. So I'm going to show you some photos of missing children, what their progression photo looked like, and what they actually looked like when they were found. And if you're new to my page, I do all sorts of true crime and ghost stories, so make sure you're following along. So here's the first one. Here's two kids that went missing when they were children. And here's what detectives guessed they would look like as they got older. But here's what they actually look like when they were found. As you can tell, like the hair color is wrong, general face shape is kind of right. I guess on the little boy it's more accurate, but these look like pretty much completely different people. So here's another one. Here's a baby that went missing. And this is what detectives thought he might look like when he got older, and granted, it's so hard to do this on babies. As you can tell, he doesn't really look anything like what his progression photo looked like when he was eventually found, but this little girl below has some similar features to what they thought she would look like as she got older. I'm so happy that this group of kids got found, but it's also proof that you need to find kids as quickly as possible because they just start looking so different so quickly. So there's this Reddit thread right now that says, I worked in a California state prison for 20 years, and these are some of my paranormal experiences. And the stories in this thread are legitimately terrifying. But the scariest one is probably that one night a guard was down in solitary confinement counting all of the prisoners in each cell, just making sure that all 28 prisoners were accounted for. Each prisoner was supposed to have the appropriate paperwork filled out for them, but he noticed that there was one extra prisoner with no paperwork filled out. So the guy goes back to his station and calls his supervisor to ask about this unregistered prisoner. But the supervisor said no one should be in that cell. So the guard quickly runs back to the cell, but by that point, the mysterious prisoner is no longer there. And then he goes on to say that other guards had the same thing happen to them too. And if you've had any paranormal experiences, make sure you email me for a chance to be featured on my podcast. Alice remembered passing 3-year-old Mary Edens out of a window. But when Alice escaped the burning building herself, Mary was nowhere to be found. On Christmas Eve 1924, 200 people in Oklahoma crammed into this one-story schoolhouse for a Christmas Eve program. But as the program was ending, the Christmas tree got knocked over and the candles on it caused the entire school to erupt in flame. A woman named Alice was there holding her 3-year-old niece Mary Edens. The last thing she remembered before passing out from smoke inhalation was passing Mary through the window to a stranger on the other end. But when Alice awoke, she learned the news that no one had seen Mary since the fire. Not only that, but everyone who had died in the fire was accounted for, and Mary was the only person missing from the event. So where did she go? Well, 30 years later, a woman shows up to Mary's parents' house claiming to be Mary. And while Mary's parents accepted her as their child, some people in the community started thinking something was wrong. This whole story is crazy, and I cover the whole thing on my podcast. Give it a listen and let me know your theories. These serial killers got caught because of stupid mistakes they made. And I cover all sorts of true crime and spooky stuff here, so make sure you follow along. Dennis Rader was a prolific serial killer in Kansas from 1974 to 1991. He was called BTK, which stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, because that's what he liked to do. But he also liked to taunt the police. He would send the police letters signed BTK, which could not be traced back to his real identity. So in the early 2000s, he had been dormant for over 10 years, but he still liked to taunt the police. And the early 2000s also brought new technology for communicating. So BTK, being the mad genius he was, wrote a letter to police asking if he sent them a floppy disk, would they be able to trace it back to him? And the police answered this letter basically saying, no, we totally can't do that. So BTK sends the police a floppy disk, and there is metadata on this floppy disk that says the last edit was done by someone named Dennis at Christ Lutheran Church. And then a 10-second Google search showed police that Dennis Rader was the president of the council at Christ Lutheran Church. Afterwards, the police basically came out and said that if Dennis had just kept his mouth shut and kept murdering, they probably would have never caught him. Let me know if you want more of these, because there's some other idiots out there. These are serial killers that got caught for being idiots. And yes, this is a series, so make sure you follow along. This is David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam. He's best known for being the serial unaliver who believed that his neighbor's dog was telling him to commit the crimes. And he was really hard to catch. His attacks felt random and lacked pattern, other than the fact that a lot of his victims were women with long brown hair. But the thing that did this man in was that he parked illegally while committing one of the crimes. Cecilia Davis was out walking her dog one night when she saw a car being ticketed. And then out of nowhere, she sees this figure come towards her with what looks like a gun in his hand. She freaks out and runs away, but hears 2 gunshots get fired behind her. The next day, she learns that 2 people, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante, had been shot in that area. So she calls the police and tells them everything she saw that night. The man with the gun, hearing the gunshots, and seeing the car with the ticket. And the cops did a real quick search through their database and found that the car had been registered to Berkowitz, who was already on their radar. And the second they went to question him about it, he confessed to everything. If you're in Pittsburgh and you hear a mysterious recording of a baby crying or a child calling for help, lock your door. I have like 5 minutes to do my makeup. So more and more people in Pittsburgh are complaining about hearing babies crying outside of their windows at night, as was the case with Olivia Bennington last week. Her sister claimed that Olivia would wake up every night at 3 a.m. claiming that there was a baby wailing outside of her window. But her sister never heard anything and honestly felt like Olivia was going crazy. Then one day, Olivia's sister came home to find Olivia packing an overnight bag. Olivia said she had to leave. There was something outside of her window tormenting her. If it wasn't a baby, then she had no idea what it was, but it felt like it was something evil. Olivia couldn't stop her sister from leaving. And she's the 5th person this month to go missing after having similar complaints. Have you heard of the singer who narrowly escaped Ted Bundy? This is part of a series called Close Encounters, people who just barely escaped a terrible fate, so follow along for more. So Debbie Harry is the iconic singer from the band Blondie, and one night in 1970, before she was even famous, she was out late at night walking by herself in Manhattan. And that's when she was approached by an attractive man in a white Volkswagen Beetle. Sound familiar? She said she got a bad feeling from the man and said no, but he was pretty persistent. And she had been walking a while and her feet were hurting and she was tired, so eventually she kind of just gave in and got in the car. She quickly realized that something was not right with this car. The backseat had no window cranks and no handles, like there was no way for her to get out of the car. She starts panicking, but she has the wherewithal to reach her arm out of the open window and open the car door from the outside. But the man driving sees her do this, so he speeds up and takes a really sharp corner, throwing her out of the car onto the street. Years later, during the Ted Bundy trial, Debbie Harry was watching TV and immediately recognized him. Some people are skeptical and say that Ted Bundy might have been in Florida when Debbie reported seeing him, but all of these years, Debbie has remained steadfast in the fact that it was definitely him that picked her up, and all of the details she has noted about the car have been spot on. Bundy went on to confess to the murder of 30 women, but a lot of people think that number is a lot higher. So thank God she got out of that car. Would you buy this scary abandoned house with your friends? The Carlton Island Villa in upstate New York has been abandoned since 1927. And on top of that, its original owner, William Wyckoff, died the very first night he stayed in the house. But it's currently on sale for only $375,000, which in this economy is a steal. It's on the water. Some photos of the original layout still exist, and it's crazy to see how this turned into this, or how this became this. But if you're a millennial who doesn't know how you'll ever be able to afford a house, this might be the best chance you have. Sure, it needs some work, but just start a TikTok renovating this place. I'm sure it'll blow up and pay for itself. So send this to a friend that you would go in on splitting this with. Okay, so this is kind of a weird thing that's happening, but the head of Scientology, David Miscavige, is reportedly missing. He's currently under investigation for child trafficking, and lawyers have tried to serve him 27 times in the last 4 months, but no one knows where he is. The charges come from 3 victims who claim that Miscavige forced them to work on boats as children after they were also forced to sign a $1 billion contract. In Scientology, they consider you to be an adult at 6 years old. One of the victims also claimed that after her mother left Scientology, the victim was forced to stay in a closet for 48 hours. All of this, of course, also comes after Shelley Miscavige, David's wife, has not been seen since 2007, even though recently it's been reported that she might be living in Big Bear, California. As you've probably already heard, an arrest has been made in the Idaho stabbing case. But now some really interesting information is coming out about the way the police caught who they believe the killer is. So pretty quickly after the tragedy, police were looking for this white Hyundai Elantra. It was seen near the crime scene as the tragedy was happening, but then it was also caught on a security camera speeding away right afterwards. And what car was found at Bryan Kohberger's house in Pennsylvania? A white Hyundai Elantra. But police had been tracking this car for 4 days when they caught Bryan. Apparently, Bryan's father had flown out to Washington to meet him, and they drove the car home to Pennsylvania together. Up until this point, we didn't know at what point the police believed that Bryan was a suspect, but now we know that they had been tracking his trip cross country. And prior to this, police had actually gotten a genealogical DNA hit that matched Bryan's DNA to the crime scene. What this basically means is police collected all of the DNA that was found at the crime scene and put it through DNA sequencing that takes a long time, and were able to match most of the DNA to the 4 victims. But there was also DNA there that didn't make any sense. And when it was put through the genealogical sequencing, they got a hit on one of Bryan's relatives. Pair that with the fact that when they went to check on him, he was driving the white Elantra cross country to his parents' house, and voila. Have you guys seen these 2023 predictions that were made 100 years ago? Some of them are hysterical, but some of them are like eerily accurate. The first one just says no more hard work by 2023, and it says that we're not going to work more than 4 hours a day because of electricity. It also says that every city will be a spotless town. But oh no, this one says we should worry because men will be wearing curls and women will be shaving their heads. Which, this is the least of my concerns in the world we've created for ourselves. And then this one really doubles down on the curls for men. This one got really close, so it tried to predict our population in 2023 at 300 million people. And as of July 1st, 2022, we were at 333 million. This was a really ambitious one because flying had just been invented, but it said you'd be able to fly from Chicago to Hamburg in 18 hours. And we actually figured out how to do it in half that time. This one was kind of spooky because it says that people will not begin the day by reading the world's news, but by listening to it. I don't know if they predicted that NPR was going to have a whole podcasting arm, but that one is very accurate. And then this one has been freaking a lot of people out because it says watch-size radio telephones will keep everybody in communication with the end of the earth. In the early 1920s, you couldn't even dial phone numbers. You had to be connected to an operator every time you picked up the phone. So the fact that they predicted that we would have small phones that also broadcasted radio and talk on them, and we could call anywhere in the world, is like kind of amazing. Okay, wait till you see this creepy Zillow listing. So this house in South Carolina is being sold for $130,000 in 2017. But look at this caveat. Upstairs apartment cannot be shown under any circumstances. Buyer assumes responsibility for the month-to-month tenancy of the upstairs apartment. Occupant has never paid and no security deposit is being held, but there is a lease in place. Yes, it does not make any sense. Please don't bother asking. So basically there's a squatter upstairs. Someone else also pointed out that it looks like there's water damage from a leak coming from the mysterious upstairs tenant. This photo is also posted with the listing, and I'm gonna assume that's paint just so I can sleep tonight. So would you buy a house for under market value if it meant that the Babadook was living upstairs rent-free? This is one of many creepy homes we're gonna investigate, so make sure you're following along. So I am living for scary Zillow listings, and listen to these terrifying home buying experiences. So this couple was buying a foreclosed home in Geneva, Illinois when they saw this on the wall. Do not buy this house. It is haunted, by 2 ghosts. 2 women, they hate men. Property built on graveyard, and this is a 1875, I cannot read that next part. The other properties, everyone has, I think that word is divorced. Please do not acquire if you are married. Awful things will happen to you. The couple ended up not buying that home, but it sounds like it was haunted by 2 roommates that make you leave your husband. And I can't tell if that message is more or less creepy than this next one that another couple found in a house. A couple found this written on the basement door, but it says, "Hi, my name is Jim and I will die in 2012. The couple also didn't buy this house, but if Jim died 10 years ago, I mean, in this market, you really can't be picky. I think about this true crime case every year around the holidays. On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sauter family house burned down in West Virginia, and only 4 of the 9 children home that night made it out. The cops told the parents that all 5 children must have died in the fire that night, but when they did a search of the area the next day, no remains were found. Like, absolutely no evidence of the kids being in the house was found. So then fast forward a year, and the dad sees a photo in a magazine of a little girl in New York who looks identical to his daughter Betty. But then the authorities in town are like, you're crazy. There's no way all the kids died in the fire that night. And then a little while after that, the authorities actually get in trouble for planting evidence in the rubble saying that the kids died in the fire. And then fast forward another 20 years, and the parents actually get a letter in the mail with this photo claiming to be their son Lewis, but are never able to find any more information about who this is. There's so many more twists and turns to this story, and I actually do a full breakdown in my most recent podcast episode. But if you know the case, what do you think? Did the kids really die in the fire that night? I'm gonna show you another one of the craziest true crime moments ever caught on camera. So in 2011, Laura Giddings went missing at Mercer University and closely watched this concerned classmate talk to a reporter.
No one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
That man is Stephen McDaniel, and he is responsible for her murder. But the craziest part is at this point, she's still missing. So watch what happens when the reporter tells him live on TV that the body was found.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Early that Sunday morning, he had gone into her apartment with a master key that he stole for the building and murdered her. And currently, he's up for parole in 2041. One of the worst serial killers of all time is being released from prison. He goes by the name of the Serpent, and he's been linked to 20 murders of Western tourists all throughout Asia and the Middle East. Most of these attacks took place on the hippie trail, where he would lure in tourists by pretending to be a spiritual guru and then poison them. Some of his victims he would actually poison and then nurse back to health because he thought that it made them loyal to him. One time in 1976, he attempted to drug a group of 60 French students who were on holiday in New Delhi so that he could rob them. But he gave them too powerful of a dose and they all started passing out while standing up. Authorities caught on to this and he was arrested, where he was then linked to the murders of 20 other people. And he is currently being released from prison on good behavior and because of his old age. And we've seen this before with repeat killers where they just stop killing while they're in prison and then start killing the second they get out. The more I learn about this Georgia Guidestone bombing, the weirder it gets. Yesterday at 4 a.m., authorities said that the Georgia Guidestones were damaged in an explosion, which destroyed one of the pillars. And if you don't know, the Guidestones were built in 1980 by a man using a fake name and are referred to as America's Stonehenge. They feature a guide to humanity written in 8 different languages, which I'm going to get to in a sec. But then it was announced that it was actually a lightning strike, which this is the dimmest lightning strike I've ever seen, if that's the case. But conspiracy theorists have long been obsessed with the Guidestones because of the weird writings on them. The guide to humanity includes maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, and guiding reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity, which isn't so much a guide to humanity as it is eugenics. But the weirdest part of all of this is on the pillar that was destroyed by the explosion, it says that there is a time capsule placed 6 feet below this spot, and it's supposed to be opened on, and then no date. The rest of the pillars were actually demolished yesterday, but do we think someone was trying to get to the time capsule? Also, what could have been inside of it? Have you ever played this terrifying sleepover game? It starts like this. You and your friend must write down your name, first, middle, last, on a piece of paper, and then prick your finger and dot the piece of paper. Then you have to go around your entire house, turning off every light and every electronic. Then you have to stand in front of a closed wooden door and put the piece of paper down in front of it. Then you must also light a candle and place it on top of the paper. You need to knock on the door 22 times, with the last knock falling at midnight, and then blow out the candle. And then you've summoned the Midnight Man. There's not much known about the Midnight Man, and the only instruction is to not allow yourself to be caught. Three BuzzFeed Unsolved cases had groundbreaking discoveries this year. You maybe remember the story of the Lady of the Dunes. In 1974, a young woman who was out for a walk in the dunes of Cape Cod discovered the body of a woman. She wasn't able to be identified because her killer actually did things to her body so that you wouldn't be able to identify her, like removing her hand so you couldn't get fingerprints. But then this year, through DNA analysis and historical records, she was able to be identified as Ruth Marie Terry. And it turns out her husband at the time, Guy Rockwell Moldovan, was a suspect in the murder of his previous wife and stepdaughter. Then there's the case of the boy in the box, where in 1957, the body of a young boy was found wrapped in a blanket inside of a box in Philadelphia. The identity of the boy remained a mystery until this week, when through DNA analysis, he was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Police credited advancements in DNA profiling as well as volunteer sleuths who were able to figure out who his potential relatives would have been. Police also say it'll be an uphill battle to determine who is responsible for his death, since his parents have since passed. And last, we have the Somerton man, whose death in 1948 baffled Australian police. He was an unknown man found laying against the wall on Somerton Beach with nothing on him to identify him. The tags on all of his clothes had been cut, and the autopsy came back as potential poisoning, but his identity has stumped us for decades. That is until July of this year, when he was identified as Charles Webb. It's said that a DNA match from a first cousin 3 times removed was what sealed the case. Can you tell a place has a dark past just by looking at it? This is part of a series where we look at listings of homes that have tragic backstories. In June of 1996, Darlie Rudier called 911 claiming that someone had broken into this home and attacked her family. Her 2 youngest sons suffered fatal stab wounds, while she herself suffered superficial cuts and bruises as well as a deep cut on her neck. But upon arrival to the house, the cops immediately felt like the scene had been staged. And though they had this beautiful home, a quick investigation showed that the family had been in deep financial stress. Just 12 days after she had made the 911 call, Darlie was arrested for the murder of her 2 sons. She's currently on death row in Texas, but one thing has always struck me as bizarre about this case. People have assumed that the motive was to cash in on her son's life insurance policies. But the entire family was home during the attack, including her husband and other child who were upstairs. The life insurance policies of Darlie's 2 sons only totaled $10,000, while her husband's totaled $800,000. And to me, that motive just doesn't add up. This is another scary ghost story that comes from one of you guys. So Jack works for the Navy, and he has to move into naval housing on base. But there's one bedroom in the naval housing unit that Jack gets a really bad feeling from. He says it always feels like someone's in the room looking at him. So he just keeps the door closed, doesn't go in it, but then eventually he gets married and needs a bigger bedroom and has to move into this room. And weird stuff immediately starts happening. The closet starts opening by itself at night. Furniture starts moving around when he's not looking. But here's the craziest part. Jack's story isn't unique. When he starts talking to a bunch of other people in the Navy about his experience, it turns out a lot of them also feel like their homes are haunted. After some digging, I actually found out that this Navy base was built on Gunjawamp, a haunted swamp in Connecticut. I do a whole deep dive on it in my podcast, but there's something weird going on there. So this murdered Texas couple's missing baby has finally been found after 42 years. And the story is crazy. Let's take a look. So in 1981, Dean Klaus, his wife Tina Lynn, and their baby Holly disappeared without a trace in East Texas. The only clue was from an anonymous caller who said that he had found Dean's car in California. And he claimed that 3 women in white robes drove it from Texas to California. Police were actually able to track down one of the women who called herself Sister Susan, and she claimed that Dean had joined a cult and renounced all earthly possessions. And she wouldn't tell them anything else. It actually wasn't until late last year that human remains found around the same time were confirmed to be Dean and Tina's. Dean had been beaten to death and Tina had been strangled. But that didn't answer what happened to Holly. This year, investigators were searching for human remains around where Dean and Tina were found. And that's when they got a genetics hit that Holly was alive and in Oklahoma. But get this, when they were talking to Holly, they found out that she had been left on the steps of a church in Arizona by none other than 3 women in white robes. Investigation is still pending, and they are really trying to figure out who these white-robed women are. But for now, at least we know that Holly is alive and well. An almost 70-year-old unserved warrant has been found in the Emmett Till case, meaning an arrest might finally be made. Let's look at the details. A lot of us know the case. So in 1955, Carolyn Bryant Donham accused 14-year-old Emmett Till of whistling at her and identified him to the men who later went on to lynch him. There was an arrest warrant for Carolyn, but sheriffs at the time didn't want to bother her or her small children. And the warrant went missing. That is until this week when a private search party headed by Deborah Watts, who's a cousin of Emmett Till and the head of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, found it in an unmarked box in a Mississippi courthouse. No arrests have ever been made in the lynching, but Carolyn is still alive. She's 80 years old, she lives in North Carolina, and she's never spoken publicly about the event. If the warrant can still legally be served to her, that would be huge, but even if it can't, this might be enough evidence to finally arrest her. This has to be the worst catfishing case I've ever heard. This is Austin Lee Edwards, and he was a 28-year-old Virginia cop who was pretending to be someone else online and was in a relationship with a teen girl in Riverside, California. And then last week, he drove 2,500 miles from Virginia to California to kidnap her. It's reported that he parked at her neighbor's house, got out of his car, walked over to her house where he killed her grandparents and mother, and then set the house on fire. He was able to pull the teen girl out of her house and put her in his car, but he was caught a few hours later. He died in a police shootout, though the girl he took was okay. He also quit his policing job 2 weeks before he committed the crime, but his old employer said that his background check had come back completely clean. Right now, we're not sure exactly what platform he was using or what identity he was using, but be safe out there. Was Wednesday filmed in the same location as Gilmore Girls? So when I was watching Wednesday, I thought I saw some familiar locations. Mostly this gazebo and like the quaint, adorable town of Jericho looking like it's straight out of Gilmore Girls. So I did some digging and it turns out a lot of people thought the same thing. But that couldn't be farther from the truth, because most of Wednesday was actually filmed on location in Romania. This is actually Nevermore, and you can see above like where they added in all the CGI to make it this like beautiful school. Not only that, but most of it was filmed on stages in Romania, so this whole courtyard is actually just a stage. Notice you can't see the ceiling because it would just be a bunch of lights and wires. They filmed some exteriors, such as this one, but most of it was just on a stage. Tim Burton actually came out and said it was very hard to make Romania look like Vermont, but if you hadn't told me, I don't think that I would have known. What do you think? Can you tell a house is haunted just by looking at it? Today we're going through the Zillow listing of the real Conjuring house, and we're gonna see. This is an 18th century farmhouse in Rhode Island, and it was owned by the Perron family in the 70s. When they first moved in, the mom would notice that her broom would move on its own, and things around the house would mysteriously be out of place. But things in the house quickly got way worse. The kids noticed a smell of rotten eggs everywhere, and every morning at 5:15 their beds would shake. They realized they were being haunted by the ghost of a woman who died on the property in the 1800s named Bathsheba. She was reportedly practicing witchcraft in the house. It's believed that she killed a child during a satanic ritual by sticking a needle into its head. Then we all know the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren coming to the house and getting rid of Bathsheba. But according to people who have lived in this house and visited this house, there's still definitely something haunting the place. Would you ever stay in this house? This is why rental houses terrify me. So Paula was staying at an Airbnb outside of Detroit by herself. Her job had sent her there for training. And immediately in the house, she starts feeling like something is off. There was always weird shadows outside the windows, and she would hear footsteps on the roof really late at night. She ends up locking herself outside of the rental the next day, but it's not a huge deal because the property manager actually lives in the house next to it. So she asks him about the footsteps she hears on the roof at night, and he says that they have lots of raccoons in the area, but she kind of knows that it's not a raccoon. He lets her back into the house and tells her that her keys are on the bedside table, which that's kind of weird. How did he know that? Another thing about the property manager is he's an older gentleman, so he listens to his TV on full volume like all night, and she can hear it from her house. So the next night, it's kind of the same thing. Weird shadows outside the window, creaking on the roof, and then her neighbor's insanely loud television. And Paula decides that she's had enough, so she opens her side door to go over to her neighbor's house to tell him to knock it off. And that's when she stops in her tracks. She can see his TV through the window. And on it is Paula, standing at the door, looking out the window. And then she sees him get up out of his chair, walk over to the window, and smile at her. Hey, this looks like a nice house. Look at how big that yard is. Let's look at the Zillow listing. This is an estate and is being sold as is, not for the faint of heart. No, that's not a good sign. Buyers must assume responsibility for removal of all contents. Oh God, what's in there? Do not open garage door, front door, or back door. That's not leaving a lot of entrances. Well, now I gotta see what's inside. Oh no. Oh God, this is so much worse than what I thought it was gonna be. I thought as is meant that there was gonna be like black mold or bad wallpaper or something. There's also a lot of emphasis on the floors and not a lot of emphasis on the ceiling, which is never a good sign. Yeah, see how they intentionally leave the ceilings out of all the photos? But honestly, I've watched a lot of hoarders and this isn't even like top 10 worst for that show. Look at this trash pile as an opportunity to decorate a nursery. Less than $400,000 in New Hampshire? In this economy, I might do it. 2 separate universities have made a discovery which might prove the existence of the Loch Ness Monster. Tales of the Loch Ness Monster have been around for 1,500 years, but evidence has been scarce. Some people believe that it's a stray plesiosaurus that somehow made it from dinosaur times and lives in the Loch Ness. But a big hole in this theory has always been that plesiosauruses lived in saltwater, not freshwater. And the Loch Ness is all freshwater, baby. But that's until today, when the bones of a plesiosaurus were found in an ancient Moroccan river that was totally freshwater. Though this doesn't prove the existence of the Loch Ness Monster, it does disprove the theory that a Loch Ness Monster would have died in the Loch Ness due to the fresh water. But what do you think? Is the Loch Ness Monster an ancient myth or a modern-day dinosaur? She thought she was alone. So Casey Rodriguez went solo camping over the summer in Appalachia. She had just broken up with her longtime boyfriend and wanted some time alone. Casey had picked a really remote area to set up her tent in and reportedly didn't see a single other person the entire time she was camping. Though at night she claimed there was a strange rustling noise coming from outside her tent, but she just chalked it up to local wildlife. So when she gets home, she gives her dad her vintage camera and asks him to develop the photos for her. And this part gave me chills. Casey's dad calls her and asks if she met anyone while she was out camping. And Casey's like, no, it was just me. But then he asks her again and says it's fine if she met someone out there, but he just needs her to be honest with him. And again, Casey's like, Dad, no, I would tell you if I met someone out there. I was by myself the whole time. This was one of the photos that Casey's father developed. A photo of Casey asleep in her tent, taken on her own camera. Nothing scares me like Appalachia. So this Thanksgiving, Paige Hills was meeting her boyfriend's family for the first time in Appalachia. And basically, immediately upon driving into the area, she starts getting a bad feeling. She chalks it up to nerves, but it keeps getting worse that night. The family was all having dinner inside, but there was a window open. And Paige starts to hear whistling coming from the woods through the window. She doesn't really think anything of it because maybe someone was outside smoking, but that night the whistling comes back, louder. And on top of that, it sounds like someone is saying her name over and over and over again. So she goes to the window to see what's up, and there's just two red eyes staring back at her from the woods. The next morning at breakfast, she asked the family what that could have been, and they immediately looked like they saw a ghost. They told her to never speak of it ever again, and the next time she hears something, no, she didn't. So Paige is freaked out, but she has another night in the house. And that's when her boyfriend pulls her aside to show her this photo. This is what their trail cam caught the night before, and she was to never mention it again. This is a ghost story that actually happened to one of you guys. So Jenny grew up in an old country farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. And in that house, there was this spooky looking vent that went straight up to a room that no one in the house used. So one day, when Jenny's around 4 years old, she starts hearing a man's voice coming from the vent calling to her. She doesn't know any better, so she starts talking back to the voice who's asking her questions about herself. But here's the crazy thing. Prior to this happening, Jenny's uncle had taken his life. And Jenny claims that the voice coming from the vent sounded exactly like his. Jenny asks the man where he is, and he says that he's in a room that she can't see. So she runs up to the abandoned room, but there's no one inside. Is this supernatural, or was there really a grown man upstairs talking to a child? We talk about this and another ghost story on the Haunted Houses episode of my podcast. Let's take a closer look at one of Marilyn Monroe's final public appearances. On May 19, 1962, Marilyn Monroe wore the dress to sing Happy Birthday to JFK.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
But there's actually quite a bit to unpack here. For one, she was introduced at the event as the late Marilyn Monroe, which at the time people chalked it up to the fact that she was known to be late to every single social event. But seems kind of weird when you realize that months later she would pass away tragically. Also, Marilyn and JFK were having an affair at the time. Also, this is the only picture ever taken of the two of them together. People took this performance as basically proof that she and JFK were sleeping together, and conspiracy theorists afterwards believed that maybe the JFK camp had something to do with her death. But Marilyn died of an overdose of sleeping pills, and actually while she was at the event for JFK, she was fired from the movie she was on because it was known that her opiate addiction had been getting worse. But when Marilyn's body was ultimately found, her hand was draped across the phone next to her bed, leaving many to wonder if she was trying to call JFK. Why does the creepiest stuff always happen at summer camps? Over the summer at Camp Ashburn, the body of a camp counselor named Brad was found charred in a campfire. The police were really quick to rule it an accident, mostly because the counselors were having a big bonfire party the night before. But then, 3 days later, another counselor, Gemma, writes home saying that her and other counselors believe that Brad was actually murdered. Apparently, Gemma had found some stuff in Brad's belongings that just didn't sit right with her, and she had remembered some weird things happening at the bonfire party the night before. But she was going to have to prove it herself. That is, unless you can help her. I've been playing Hunt a Killer's murder mystery game, Camp Calamity, where you use clues to solve cases just like this one, and I've been loving it. It's a perfect night in for you and your true crimer friends. If you like true crime and solving mysteries, head to the link in my bio to check it out. The new Winnie the Pooh horror trailer just dropped. Let's take a look.
You know, you're the first person I ever shown this place to.
And why am I so special?
Because soon we'll be Christopher and Mary Robin.
Okay,
We
Christopher
should be close now.
We're not going to find them.
We will.
That's
Pooh, Piglet,
spooky.
Eeyore.
Okay.
We were friends for many years, and they're out there.
Christopher, we need to leave.
R.I.P. Eeyore.
Now.
I really need to find out what's happened there, okay?
No, you don't. You should probably leave. Abandoned by Christopher Robin. Oh my god. Oh my god.
This place is kind of
This
cool.
is
And
insane.
It has a pool.
no. No.
We need to go. There's.
No. No.
Laura, stay.
Oh my god.
There's someone else outside. What was that?
Stop. This is my childhood. This is my childhood. No.
We used to be friends. Why are you doing this, please?
We
I
used
would
to
have
be
never
friends.
left, I swear. I swear.
Is this what the world has come to? Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. And then they're mixing the blood and honey. I'm gonna go see it. I'm gonna go see it. I'm gonna sit through it, every single minute of it, probably twice. This is insane, but this is the kind of stuff that I love. In 1912, a young boy went missing. And when he was finally reunited with his mother, it seemed like it was not the same boy. So 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared by a lake on a family vacation in 1912. The only clue found was his hat, which led many to believe he had been kidnapped. The next year, in 1913, a man is seen traveling with a boy that looks very similar to Bobby. He was arrested, but he insisted the boy was not Bobby. He was a boy named Bruce Anderson. But the police didn't listen and returned the boy to Bobby Dunbar's mother. At first, the mother is not convinced the boy is Bobby Dunbar, but she claims that the boy has similar birthmarks to Bobby, so it must be the same child. But when she sends him to play with the neighborhood kids, they don't recognize Bobby either. The boy lived with the Dunbars for the rest of his life, went on to have a family of his own, and passed away in 1966. And almost 100 years after this took place, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters insisted a DNA test be done. And it proved what they feared to be true. The boy was Bruce Anderson. He shared no DNA with the Dunbar family. It turns out part of the reason he was not reunited with his real mother was there was a rumor that Bruce Anderson's mother was a prostitute and was not viewed favorably by the police. For more creepy history, make sure you're following along. You'll never look at a mall Santa the same way after hearing this story. So this photo was taken around 1920 in a Christmas fair happening outside of Boston. The young child in this photo is Alberta Porter, the daughter of Robert Porter, who was supposed to be Boston's next mayor. Apparently, this Santa had set up around the corner from the rest of the fair and was not visible from the rest of the fair. Robert and his daughter actually didn't even see the Santa until they were walking home. The line to see Santa inside of the fair was way too long, so when Alberta saw this Santa, she started crying and begging her dad to take a photo with him. So this photo was taken, and afterwards, the Santa asked if Alberta wanted to go on a short ride on the donkey. And she starts crying and begging her father again, so he agrees. But Alberta never returned. An hour went by and Santa still hadn't brought her back. Robert ran into the fair to ask an employee how long the donkey rides typically last, but the employee seemed really confused. There was no Santa with donkey rides at this fair. The employee pointed to the Santa who had a long line of children out in front of him and said that was the only Santa at the fair. Alberta was never found, and Robert actually dropped out of politics to spend his entire life and savings on finding her and the man who took her, and never did.